Hello friends. Tonight's story isn't about grand inventions or famous names etched in gold. It's about cold fingers, thin shoes, hunger that arrives before the morning bell. It's about the sound of a match being struck and the silence that follows it. Tonight, we won't be traveling across empires or seas. We'll be traveling back into fog, into soot, into the narrow alleys of 19th century Britain, where a child might carry coal instead of toys, and a scraped knee could mean the end of everything. So, turn down the lights, set your burdens aside, and if your blanket is warm, be grateful, because tonight you are 7 years old. You are waking up in the Victorian age, and already you are late. Imagine yourself lying still in a narrow bed, one of 3 children tangled in scratchy wool blankets, your limbs pressed against theirs for warmth. The room smells of cold iron, old smoke, and something sour that never quite fades. Damp wool, perhaps, or the chamber pot beneath the bed. The hearth in the corner has long gone cold. Frost feathers bloom on the single window pane, catching the first reluctant hints of dawn. Your breath clouds in the frigid air as you sit up, stiff and shivering, reaching for the stiff collar of your shirt. You slept in it. You always do. There's nothing else to wear. Your boots are too large. Someone else's ones. They flap when you walk and let in the wet. The hem of your coat is stiff with mud and soot, and the fabric rubs your neck raw. But you can't complain. You're lucky to have a coat at all. There's no breakfast. Maybe a piece of bread from last night if no one else took it. Your stomach growls in protest, but it's ignored. Hunger is just another part of mourning, like laces and bruises, and the way your fingers never quite feel your own. You step outside into the clamor of the street. A boy coughs behind a hand blackened with coal dust. A woman shouts from a window, dragging a pail. A horse lumbers past, steam puffing from its nostrils like a dragon lost in the fog. And you go to work. Your feet are already sore. You haven't yet walked a mile, but the work waits. Some children are sent up chimneys. If you're thin and small enough, that's where you'll go. Climb up into the dark with a brush in your hand. Push soot down with your shoulders. Cough it out of your lungs. Hope there are no hot embers left behind. It's quiet in the chimney. Too quiet. And if you get stuck, you'll scream until someone hears, or doesn't. Other children work in match factories. Their fingers dip wood into white paste, phosphorus. It glows. It smells sweet, like rot. The air is thick with it. Over time, it poisons the jawbone. They call it phossy jaw. You won't know what that means yet, but one day your teeth might ache, and no one will help. Some are coal pickers, down in the mines. They work underground, in silence broken only by picks and dripping water. You might carry a lantern, or you might lead the pit ponies, whose eyes have never seen daylight. You might have to crawl through tunnels only a child can fit in. The textile mills are louder. Deafening, really. Rows of looms clatter like 100 trains all arriving at once. The air smells of oil and lint. You work with bare hands. If they get caught in the spinning frame, you pull them out, or you don't. The overseer has a stick, not to help, just to remind. Your eyes sting, your arms ache. But if you're slow, someone else gets the job. There's always another child ready to take your place. You're 7, but no one asks your age. They only ask if you can reach the lever, and if you can count. If you're lucky, you go to school. But school isn't easy. It costs money. Not much, a few pence a week. But even that is too much for many families. Some schools are free, funded by churches or charities, but space is limited. And shoes are often required. You sit on hard benches. The room smells of ink and wet wool. A single fire struggles in the grate, and smoke drifts across your desk. The teacher carries a cane. Children recite their lessons in a dull chant. No one laughs. Talking out of turn brings the ruler. Lessons are short, or not at all. Sometimes you're sent home for poor clothes or dirty hands. Sometimes you don't go at all. Work pays, school doesn't. When you're sick, you stay home. If home is warm enough, if someone can care for you. Coughs linger for weeks. Some children don't get better. They fade, quietly. And one morning, their spot in the bed is just empty. Others are sent away. To orphanages, to reform schools, to the dreaded workhouse. No one says where exactly. You just don't see them again. And when you ask, best not to wonder. Even play feels different. If you have time, you make games out of scraps. Marbles from clay, spinning tops carved from broom handles, a piece of string, a bottle cap. You chase hoops or hop-chalked squares. Some play with bones, real ones, collected from alleys and gutters. No toys from shops, no soft animals or painted blocks. Just whatever's found, shared or stolen. And if you laugh too loud, someone tells you to hush. Always hush. Don't wake the baby. Don't disturb the lodger. Don't attract attention. Silence isn't golden. It's survival. By the time the sun dips behind the rooftops, your day is far from over. Your legs are sore, your eyes sting. The grime on your hands has settled deep into the creases. The smell of coal, smoke and sweat lingers, no matter how often you rinse with cold water from the pump. Dinner might be a crust of bread. If your mother has work, maybe a stew. Watery and thin, but hot. If she doesn't, then there's silence at the table. And the ache in your stomach doesn't go away. You may share a room with 4, 6, maybe more. Siblings, boarders, strangers. Privacy is a luxury you've never learned to expect. You close your eyes to the rhythm of coughing, of whispered stories, of footsteps in the street. Sometimes you dream, not of toys or sweet things, but of warmth, of full boots, of a fire that stays lit all night. You wake in the same bed, same chill, same itch in your clothes. The next day will be no different. And the day after that, also the same. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? How normal it all feels when you've never known anything else. And that is why you wouldn't last a day as a Victorian child. But many did. Quietly, endlessly. And some, just a few, had their stories written down. And one of them is the story we'll tell next. Her name was Sarah Gooder. She was 8 years old. Not a character from a novel or a figure in folklore, but a real child whose name appears in the written record, scribbled in simple ink on a parliamentary report from 1842. That report was part of a government inquiry, a rare moment when adults in high places looked down into the darkness and asked what exactly children were doing beneath the ground. Sarah told them, softly, simply, "I go to the pit at 4 in the morning and sometimes don't come out till 5 at night." She didn't write those words. She said them. A man wrote them down while she stood there, perhaps nervous, perhaps simply cold. The paper did not record her voice, only her facts. But tonight, we'll try to hear her voice again. Imagine Sarah Gooder's world. The year is 1842. The place, South Wales, where the land swells into green hills above and crumbles into black tunnels below. The coalfields stretch endlessly. Beneath them, darkness, damp, and labour. Sarah wakes long before the sun. There is no light in the sky, only the heavy hush of early morning, broken by the rustle of fabric and the soft scuff of her feet on stone. She is up by 3, maybe earlier. She does not stretch. There is no time. The house is quiet. Her mother might already be awake, or already gone. She wraps herself in coarse, worn layers. Maybe her brother's old jacket. Maybe boots stuffed with rags to keep out the chill. There is no breakfast laid out, just a crust of something taken in hand. Food is fuel, barely that. She does not walk to the mine alone. Other children are with her. A trickle of small shapes in the dark, bobbing toward the same mouth in the earth. Their lanterns are dim. Their footsteps are soft, practiced. They do not speak much. Breath is saved for work. The entrance to the mine is low. Some mines must be crawled into. Others slope downward on rickety tracks. Some children ride in carts. Others walk, downward always. The air grows colder, then warmer, then damp, and then quiet. It is a silence that hums, a stillness wrapped in dripping stone. The air tastes like iron and coal dust. The lantern flickers. Sarah holds it steady. She's a trapper. That is her job. She sits in the dark, alone, next to a wooden door deep inside the mine. Her task is simple. Open the door when a coal cart approaches, then close it again. The door is part of the mine's ventilation system. It keeps the dangerous gases at bay, channels fresh air through miles of tunnels. If she forgets to close it, the air stops moving. If the gases build, fires can start, or worse, explosions. But Sarah is 8. She doesn't know this. She just knows to sit and to wait, and to open the door when she hears the rumble. And the waiting stretches, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. There is no light, unless she's allowed to carry a candle. There is no one to talk to. The walls are too close, the darkness too thick. She listens to the creaks of stone, the distant clang of picks, the far-off clatter of carts, and nothing else. She has done this since she was 7. Hours pass. Inside the mine, time is strange. It stretches and shrinks. You forget what the sky looks like. The only rhythms are the creaks of wood, the rattle of carts, the shuffle of other children's boots. Sarah remains at her door. Sometimes she hums softly. Sometimes she speaks aloud. Not to anyone, just to the dark. A way to fill the silence, to feel less alone. But she does not sing loudly. Noise travels strangely underground. Some men don't like it. Her hands are cold. Her back aches. There is nowhere to stretch. She may crouch on a rock or sit on a folded coat if she has one. Otherwise, it's bare earth, damp and hard. When she needs to relieve herself, she does it where she sits. There is no break, no designated place. It is not a matter of dignity, just necessity. Everyone knows. She hears voices now, deeper in the shaft. Men shouting, or boys like herself. The carts are coming. She moves quickly, lifting the heavy wooden bar that holds the trapdoor shut. It swings open. The cart rattles past. Dust lifts in its wake. Sarah waits, then lowers the door again, refastens it, and returns to stillness. That's it. That is her job. She repeats it a dozen times a day, sometimes more, sometimes less. On good days, she is not forgotten. Someone brings a bit of bread or a sip of water. On bad days, she waits empty-bellied, and when her candle burns down, she waits in complete blackness. Sarah told the commissioner that she didn't like being alone in the dark, that she was frightened. But she stayed, because she had to. Sometimes she hears coughing, deep, rattling, harsh. Coal dust sits in the lungs and doesn't leave. Miners spit black phlegm. Some wear rags over their mouths. Most don't. It wouldn't help much anyway. Sarah doesn't understand all of it. She knows work. She knows duty. She knows that money comes only if she goes down. 12, 13 hours. That's how long her shift lasts. When it's time to leave, she follows the others upward. Legs aching, stomach hollow, boots heavy with wet coal dust. Outside, the light hurts her eyes. It is evening. She has been underground since before dawn. And tomorrow, she will do it again. The walk home is long. Sarah moves with slow steps, her legs heavy and awkward. Her boots, still too large, slap softly against the stones. The coal dust clings to everything, to her cuffs, to her fingernails, to the soft edges of her face. It's not far, not in miles, but after 13 hours below ground, the way back feels endless. She does not walk alone. Other children are with her, some quiet, some whispering, some dragging tools behind them, too tired to lift them. The houses are close together, each one just like the last. Grey stone, leaking chimneys, crooked windows. Laundry flaps across alleyways like flags of surrender. As Sarah nears home, she sees her mother by the doorway, not waiting exactly, just standing, holding a pot, stirring slowly. The broth inside is thin, mostly water, with a turnip or two. Maybe some barley if the week was good. Sarah doesn't say much. She rarely does. She scrapes off her boots, rubs at her hands, then sits quietly in her corner. The fire is small, but warm. The smell of coal smoke hangs in the air, thick and familiar. She leans toward it, letting the heat reach her cheeks. Her mother gives her a bowl. It's not full, but it's something. Sarah holds it close, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. She doesn't gulp it down. She eats slowly, each bite its own small comfort. Sometimes, not always. Her older brother shares a bit of bread. He breaks it without a word, slides it toward her. They don't look at each other, but Sarah smiles faintly. That smile is rare. It's the smile of a child who knows kindness is not guaranteed, and all the more precious for it. After the meal, there is little else. No toys, no play, no books. Maybe a scrap of song from the street. Maybe the sound of boots upstairs. A snore from the room beyond. Her bed is a sack of straw in the corner. Scratchy, lumpy. She lies down fully dressed. She always sleeps in her clothes. It's easier that way. Saves time in the morning. She wraps her arms around herself, closes her eyes. The warmth fades quickly, but for a moment, just a moment, the ache in her limbs begins to drift away. She is 8, and she is asleep. Sarah's world was built by adults, but she didn't belong to it. She moved through it, small, quiet, invisible, unless needed. She didn't question their decisions. There wasn't time. And the people around her, even the ones who cared, were just trying to survive. The adults in her life fell into categories. Some were kind in small ways. A father who patted her head, an older sister who slipped her an apple core, a neighbor who once gave her an old shawl. Nothing grand, just moments, gestures, pieces of comfort scattered like crumbs. But most grown-ups were distant, burdened, tired. Their faces were lined with coal dust and worry. Their voices were roughened by smoke and strain. They did not speak much. They shouted, or whispered, or kept their silence. There were overseers at the pit, men with leather belts and wooden sticks. They barked orders. They watched everything. Sarah did not look them in the eye. She learned not to. To them, she was not a child. She was a pair of hands, a moving shadow, a gap small enough to squeeze between beams. She saw them laugh sometimes, not with joy, with scorn. They teased the boys, mocked the smallest, called names, gave orders without thinking. She didn't hate them. She didn't know how to hate, but she avoided them when she could. And then there were the people who came from outside. Once, just once, she saw a man in a fine coat, not coal-streaked, clean. He had a notebook in his hand, and he asked her questions. That was the day her words were written down. He asked about her work, her hours, her job. She answered plainly. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She told him about sitting in the dark, about opening the trap door. When he asked if she was afraid, she said yes, but quietly. He wrote that part down too. She never saw him again. And when she told others he had come, they didn't believe her, or they didn't care. Sarah didn't think of herself as a victim. That wasn't a word she knew. She thought of herself as a worker, a girl who did what she had to, who waited and listened and opened doors. She didn't know there was a world beyond the pit, a world where children read books and wore clean clothes, where toys were carved and painted, where girls took music lessons and had handkerchiefs sewn with their initials. That world was farther from her than the moon, and no one was coming to carry her there. Even in the darkest places, children find one another. Sarah had a friend, another girl, maybe a year older. Her name might have been Lizzie or May. The records don't say. But Sarah remembered her. They worked in the same pit, sat near the same shaft, passed each other in the narrow tunnels when the shifts changed. They didn't talk much. Words cost energy, but they shared things. A piece of bread, a bit of string, a chalk mark on the wall. They carved shapes into the stone, circles, crosses, the outline of a hand. Not art, just something to leave behind. Something that said, I was here. I was small and cold and real. One day, Lizzie brought a secret. It was a marble, glass, green, with a swirl in the center, smooth and cool in the hand. Sarah held it like treasure. She didn't ask where it came from. She didn't need to know. For a moment, they passed it back and forth in the flickering lamplight, letting it catch the glow. A world inside a ball. A whole sky trapped in glass. They played with it for just a few minutes, maybe less. Then it was tucked away, hidden in a pocket or a boot. They never lost it. Some things you don't let go of. Sometimes, Sarah was allowed above ground before her full shift ended. Maybe the carts ran late. Maybe someone forgot to close the ledger. She didn't ask why. She just stepped out into the open air, squinting against the sunlight, lungs filling with something almost fresh. She'd find a stone wall to sit on, a place just far enough from the noise. She'd tuck her legs up beneath her and watch the smoke rise from distant chimneys. For that hour, no one needed her. And for that hour, she wasn't a trapper or a worker or a shadow. She was a girl with dirt on her cheeks and sore hands, yes, but also a girl with thoughts, with the sky above her, with a marble in her pocket. And in that moment, she was allowed to simply be, not forever, not even for long, but long enough to remember it later, long enough to dream about it sometimes when sleep finally came. Sarah didn't leave many marks on history, just that one short interview, a few lines of testimony, her name, her job, her hours. And then, silence. After 1842, her trail fades. Like so many children of her time, she disappears into the fog of unrecorded lives. No birth certificate survives, no death notice, no school records, no grave. Just a girl's words, spoken once in a dark room to a man with a pen. But we can guess what came next, not because we know for sure, but because we know what happened to many others. She may have fallen ill. The mines were filled with damp air and fine dust, soot, mold, and gas. No fresh breeze ever reached that far underground. Many children developed chronic coughs. Some lived with it for years, others didn't. There were no doctors for the poor, not unless you counted the ones at the parish hospital. Crowded, rushed, overworked. Medicine was basic. Germs weren't understood, and most ailments were met with rest if you were lucky, or work if you weren't. Children often worked through fevers, through chills, through bruises and burns and sprains. The body was expected to endure, but sometimes it didn't. Some children simply faded. A few days in bed, then nothing. No more footsteps on the stairs. No more waiting at the mine gate. The younger children didn't always ask questions. They noticed. Then they moved on. It was too painful and too common to do anything else. If Sarah died young, she wouldn't have had a funeral with flowers and lace. She might have been buried in a pauper's plot, unmarked, unremembered by name, but held tightly in the memory of someone who once shared a crust with her, someone who remembered her laugh, her eyes, her marble, or perhaps she lived on. In the orphanage at Aberlour, Scotland, workers renovating the attic decades later found a small space between beams, just large enough for a child to sit in, curled tight. The dust there was thick, the wood warped by time, but on the wall, a message, one word scratched faintly, sorry. There was no record of who wrote it, no log of the infraction, no notes in the matron's diary, just a word left behind in stillness. Maybe the child had been sent there. Maybe they had hidden on their own. Maybe they simply needed to disappear for a while, to escape the noise, the watchful eyes, the cold demands. Or maybe they truly were sorry. For what? We'll never know. But they needed someone to know they said it, even if the only listener was the wall. Every orphanage had its stories, not written ones, not read aloud, whispered ones, passed from bed to bed, from child to child, after the lamps were dimmed and the footsteps of matrons had faded down the hall. They weren't fairy tales. They were warnings. In one home, it was said that if you cried too loudly, a man with no face would come from the basement and steal your voice. In another, a girl was said to have vanished after disobeying during prayer. Not run away, not taken, just gone, leaving behind only her shoes beneath the bed. These weren't literal beliefs, not really. They were shaped from fear, from boredom, from the deep, lonely need to explain why things hurt, why children disappeared, why the rules were so strict, why the air sometimes felt heavy in a room, even when no one spoke. In many orphanages, basements were locked, attics were sealed, children were told never to go there. And so, they wondered, imagined. One child might whisper that the attic held a room of forgotten toys, the good ones, taken from disobedient children. Another might insist it was where bad children were sent and never returned. The truth was usually simpler. Most sealed rooms held nothing but dust, old furniture, moth-eaten coats. But in some, workers found things. Bundles of clothes, stashed letters, pieces of a forgotten childhood, carefully placed, then left behind, and sometimes dolls, handmade, stuffed with rags, eyes made of buttons or beads, found sitting upright on old shelves or tucked behind bricks. Not evil, not cursed, just waiting. And in waiting, a little frightening, because the child who made them was long gone, and the story of why they were hidden is gone too. The line between comfort and fear in these places was always thin. A lullaby could become a spell. A locked door could become a threat. And a doll, once hugged tightly in the night, could become a ghost. Not because the children believed in monsters, but because they lived in a world where the real dangers wore shoes, held keys, spoke kindly, and still turned away. The Victorian age was one of ledgers. Everything was written down. Every blanket issued, every punishment given, every portion of gruel served. The handwriting was neat, the columns ruled with precision. In orphanages, children were reduced to entries: name, age, origin, if known, status, destitute, abandoned, illegitimate, occupation, when old enough, scrubber, seamstress, errand boy. Medical logs recorded coughs and fevers, sometimes broken limbs. Rarely were causes explained. Sometimes you see a note, sent away, or simply left. Where did they go? No answer. The silence is louder than the words. There are gaps in the records where children should be. A boy listed in June disappears by August. No comment, no reason. A girl's name reappears 2 years later, in a hospital register. It's easy to forget that behind every number was a voice that might have laughed, or sung, or whispered to a friend in the dark. And yet the language of the record books is cold. Female 9th, subject to hysteria, confined. Male 11th insolent, bread and water only. Removed to institution, unfit for domestic placement. There are no questions in these lines, no wonderings, no worries, just facts, written by hands that may have believed they were doing right. But not all records were official. In the margins of one logbook, long after the page had been filled, a different ink appears. It's a single note. She used to sing in the morning. I hope she still does. There's no signature, no date, just a human voice reaching across time. And that's what's so haunting and so tender about these places. For all their rules and registers and locked doors, children still found ways to leave themselves behind. Not in stories written for them, but in things they touched, scratched, hid. Things waiting in the walls, and things we still find even now. Many of the old orphanages are gone now. Some were demolished, others converted into flats, schools, or museums. Their long halls echo with different footsteps, the sound of life moving on. But if you listen, some places still speak. In one former institution, a brick was removed during renovation. Behind it was a space no larger than a shoebox. Inside, a handkerchief, carefully folded, embroidered with the letter E wrapped around it, a pencil stub, worn to the wood, and a piece of cloth with tiny stitchwork, a heart, barely visible. There was no note, just care. And that care, buried in a wall for over a century, tells us more than any ledger could. It tells us that even in places built on discipline, there was tenderness. Even among silence, a soft voice persisted. And it reminds us that history is not always made of battles and kings. Sometimes it's made of things left behind by children who are never supposed to be remembered. A single shoe in a chimney, a name scratched behind a cupboard, a marble buried in the floor. These are not grand monuments, but they are something deeper. Proof that even when stripped of comfort, of warmth, of voice, the human spirit leaves a trace, even in brick and dust, even in silence, especially in silence. The house is quiet, not silent, just soft. Slippers on carpets, clock hands ticking, the faint clink of china in a distant parlor. You are a child, but not like Sarah, not like the boys in the mines or the girls behind factory windows. You live in a townhouse or a country estate, somewhere with hedges trimmed just so, and windows tall enough to let in the entire afternoon. Your clothes are made of velvet and lace, button boots polished daily by the maid, hair combed, curled, and beribboned, a clean collar, a white sash tied with a precise bow. And yet, your days are not your own. You wake to the sound of the nursery bell. A governess arrives, always calm, always correct. She decides what you wear, what you read, when you speak. Your nursery is upstairs, away from the grown-ups. A world of soft furnishings and quiet supervision. Toys are placed just so. Dolls with porcelain cheeks, hobby horses, puzzles imported from Germany, alphabet blocks carved from polished wood. But they are not for throwing, not for clutching in sleep. They must be kept neat, displayed, respected. Even play is measured. There is tea in the nursery at 4 o'clock. Tiny cups, milk with a dash of tea, biscuits cut in perfect rounds, a cloth napkin across your lap. You say thank you. You don't speak until spoken to. Your governess smiles sometimes. She might tell a story, a fable, a bit of history, but you know not to interrupt, not to wiggle, not to spill, because someone is always watching. Perhaps not your parents. They are elsewhere, in the drawing room, in London, at a dinner engagement. They love you, of course, but they are not often here. Instead, your world is ruled by nannies, tutors, servants. You are dressed by one set of hands, taught by another, corrected by a third. You are loved in theory, but you are touched less than you would like, and even your tears are tidy. Your day is structured like a grown-up's. Lessons begin after breakfast, at a small desk by the window or in the schoolroom down the hall. You study French verbs, Latin roots, copy handwriting in perfect lines, learn poetry by heart. You practice the pianoforte, not with freedom, but precision. Notes repeated until your wrists ache, not with pain, but posture. You are praised for stillness, for being quiet, for being good. If you speak too much or not enough, you may be gently corrected. It is not cruel. It is polite. And that is perhaps more difficult. Because in this world, discipline is disguised as affection, and affection comes in formality. A pat on the head, a small smile from your governess when you've recited all your lessons without a mistake. There are portraits on the wall, painted likenesses of children from generations past, in silk dresses, sailor suits, velvet coats. Their eyes seem to follow you, their faces calm, beautiful, behaving. One day you will be painted too. You must sit still, for hours. The artist will tell you to relax, but not too much. Smile, but not too wide. Be natural, as long as it fits the frame. This portrait will hang in the stairwell or the parlor. Visitors will admire it. You will be remembered as you appeared, elegant, composed, good. But what if you had wanted to laugh, to cry, to run? That's not part of the picture. Your meals are quiet affairs. You dine with your siblings, perhaps, under the eye of the head nurse. Soup in silver bowls. Vegetables arranged just so. Napkins folded. Elbows tucked in. You're taught to speak properly. To say pardon instead of what. To rise when an adult enters the room. To never, ever ask for more. Because in this world, too much want is impolite. Even if what you want is to be held, to be noticed, to be heard. At first glance, this world is easier. No soot, no calluses. Perhaps she grew taller, stronger. Perhaps she moved into surface work. Perhaps she married, had children of her own. But if she did, there is no trace of it. She slips through history's fingers like dust from a coal cart. Gone, but not forgotten. Because once, for just a few minutes, she spoke. And what she said was simple. I don't like being in the pit. I'm frightened. I want to go home. Sarah's voice, though faint, still echoes. It lingers not because it was loud, but because it was rare. A child's voice from a time when children were mostly silent in the public record, not seen, not heard, not asked. She told the truth, plainly, bravely, when someone finally listened. And then she returned to the shadows. There were thousands like her, boys and girls bent under sacks, hunched in tunnels, crouched beside clattering machines, some younger than Sarah, some older, all caught in the turning gears of a society that needed coal, needed light, needed labor, and looked to the smallest hands to provide it. Some became names, most did not, but their traces are there if you know where to look. A broken doll found near a former mill, a name scratched into the underside of a workbench, a faded photo of a child with hollow cheeks and watchful eyes, and of course, the records, dry, official, factual, but behind each line, a heartbeat, a girl like Sarah. We don't know what happened to her, but we know what her words helped do. That 1842 report, the one she spoke for, changed things, not all at once, not for everyone, but it marked a beginning. Laws followed, inspections, restrictions. Slowly, painfully, the idea took hold. The children should not work in darkness, that they should learn and grow and play, that they should have a childhood. Sarah didn't see the world change, but she helped light the path. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Imagine walking down a long, tiled hallway. The ceiling is high, the windows are barred. Your footsteps echo, crisp, lonely, across stone floors worn smooth by generations of children who walked the same path. This place was once an orphanage, a Victorian institution, tall brick, iron gates, rooms with numbers, not names. Now, it's something else, maybe a museum, or a housing complex, or a ruin, but traces remain, beneath the new paint, under the floorboards, behind the bricks. They are not stories written in books, they are quieter than that. A child's shoe, hidden deep in a chimney, stuffed far out of reach, blackened with soot, its laces still tied. Why a shoe? Historians believe it was for protection, a common superstition in Victorian England. Place a single shoe in the wall or hearth to ward off evil, a sort of domestic magic, practical faith, the kind that doesn't need words. In orphanages, these shoes weren't placed by architects or matrons, they were hidden by children. Late at night, when no one was looking, slipped into a corner, behind a grate, beneath a floorboard, a secret between a child and whatever quiet hope they could hold on to. And there were more. In one reform school, an archaeologist found carvings, initials scratched into the wood of bed frames, tally marks along the window ledge, a calendar scratched behind a cabinet, not made for decoration, not meant to last, just a way to count the days, to mark a name, to say, I was here. And I waited. The walls absorbed all of it, the noise, the fear, the long silences between inspections. Even now, when the buildings are empty, people say they feel something. Not ghosts exactly, just memory. Grief, perhaps, folded into stone. Not loud, but not gone. When workers began restoring an old London workhouse, they stripped away layers of plaster. What they found underneath wasn't valuable in the usual sense, but it stopped them all the same. Tiny names, scratched into the brick. Dozens of them, some neat, others crooked, as if made by hands too small to hold a nail properly. Not just initials, full names, sometimes followed by a date, a year, maybe a message. Most were too faint to read. One said simply, Tommy, 1883, cold today. Another, sister gone. No one had painted over them. No one had erased them. They had simply been forgotten, sealed behind paint, behind time. But for the children who wrote them, they meant everything. Imagine the moment. A boy, maybe 10 years old, finding a sharp stone, kneeling beside the wall when no one's looking, pressing it into the brick, watching each line form, feeling perhaps a kind of control, a moment of permanence in a world that left no room for softness. These weren't places where children were cuddled. They weren't kissed goodnight. They weren't rocked when they cried. Kindness existed, in scraps, a warm roll, a matron who turned a blind eye. But affection was rare. Hugging could be seen as coddling. Smiling even was sometimes discouraged. The system prized order, quiet, discipline. Even toys were discouraged. Play was seen as idleness, and idleness was a sin. Yet still, children played in their own ways. A ball made from rags, a piece of twine turned into a game, a wooden spoon smuggled under a mattress turned into a puppet, and they wrote. Not poems, not letters, just names, their names. Because in a place where every child wore the same clothes, ate the same porridge, followed the same rules, the only thing that belonged to you was your name. If you didn't write it down, would anyone remember it? Not all messages were carved. Some were tucked away, folded carefully, hidden. During renovations of a 19th century girls' home in Yorkshire, a small paper was found wedged between bricks behind a fireplace. Yellowed, brittle, nearly crumbling at the touch. It was a prayer. Not a formal one, not copied from a Bible. Just a few lines written in uncertain script. Please, God, keep Lizzie warm. She is little. I can give her my blanket if you keep her safe. No one knows who wrote it, or when. The paper wasn't dated. The fireplace hadn't worked in over 100 years. But someone had knelt there, alone, cold, and believed enough to write those words. It wasn't about miracles or salvation. It was about someone else. A sister maybe, a friend, another small girl with bare feet and a cough. Somewhere in the dust of these buildings are hundreds of moments like this. Scraps of paper under loose boards, fabric tucked into corners, beads from a broken rosary, half a toy soldier, a doll's leg carved from soap. Archaeologists call them ephemera, but they were never meant for history. They were meant to comfort, to protect, to last through the night. Some children didn't leave anything behind, not because they didn't want to, but because they weren't allowed, or didn't have the time, or didn't believe anyone would ever care. But the ones who did, who pressed names into wood, or folded a note, or buried a single shoe in the wall, they left proof. Not proof of suffering, proof of being. Proof that even in places built to erase individuality, the children pushed back, quietly, gently, persistently. To understand Victorian orphanages, you must understand how they were built, not just from brick, but from belief. The Victorians did not simply see poor children as unlucky. They often saw them as broken. Children were thought to be born with original sin. Left unchecked, they might become thieves, idlers, drunkards. So when the wealthy built homes for the orphaned or abandoned, they often believed they were saving souls, not just lives. It was charity, but it was also control. Reform schools, industrial schools, workhouses, even the word orphanage hid a complexity. Many of the children weren't truly orphans. Some had one parent still alive, too poor, too sick, or simply unable to keep them. And once inside, the child became part of a system. There was food, yes, clothing, shelter, but nothing was free. Chores began early. Beds had to be made to strict standards, floors scrubbed, boots shined, lines walked in silence. Daily life followed a rhythm, not of play, but of order. A bell rang. Children lined up. A bell rang. They sat to eat. A bell rang. They marched. Even kindness was structured. Gifts were rare and often shared communally. Rewards were tokens, not toys. A few extra spoonfuls of porridge. A half day without labor. Permission to sit closer to the fire. The idea of saving a child meant shaping them into something useful. Girls were taught to sew, scrub, cook. Boys were taught to hammer, polish, sweep. These were not homes in the soft sense. They were machines, designed to produce obedience. That doesn't mean all caretakers were cruel. Some were gentle. Some offered a quiet smile, a pat on the head, a whispered song. But even they operated within a system that saw poverty as moral failure. You could be fed, but you had to earn it. You could be clothed, but never comfortably. You could be warm, but only if you followed every rule. And if you disobeyed, there were punishments. We'll speak of those next. Discipline in Victorian orphanages was not always loud. Sometimes it was silence that did the harm. If a child misbehaved, if they spoke out of turn, left food uneaten, wet the bed, or cried too long, the punishment might come quickly, or later, or not at all that day, but the next. And often, it wasn't the cane. It was being made to stand, for hours, against the wall, without moving, without speaking, until their knees buckled and the tears dried. Or it was the food being taken away, just a little less, just enough to notice, to remember. Some were locked in cupboards, small ones, with no light, no sound but their own breath and the creak of wood. Others were ghosted, made invisible, not spoken to, not included in songs, in prayers, in chores. A day without words, a day when no one met your eyes. These were punishments designed not to bruise, but to wear down, to quiet the child inside the child. There were worse, of course, canes and switches and straps, but those leave marks that fade. The other kind, the silent ones, lived longer, no hunger pangs echoing through the night. You sleep on linen sheets, tucked beneath embroidered quilts. A fire glows gently in the grate. Toys are arranged along the windowsill. Dolls with painted lashes, tin soldiers polished to a shine. But comfort here is not freedom. It is ceremony. And behind the satin curtains and the trimmed hedges lies a different kind of stillness. One where emotions are managed, expressions are measured, children are seen, but not too much. You're told stories about children less fortunate. You may even visit a poor school with your governess. Bring bread, say thank you, be polite. You are taught that kindness is your duty, but also your distance. That childhood is to be cultivated, controlled, curated. And as you grow, so do the expectations. For girls, poise, obedience, grace. For boys, discipline, Latin, legacy. You may inherit land, a name, a role, but not choice, not always joy. Even play is rehearsed. A tea party for dolls, a garden walk in gloves, a drawing room game, watched by adults who nod when you do things properly. You are safe, yes, but the safety comes with silence. And in the silence, sometimes, loneliness grows. It's not the kind of loneliness you speak about. It's the kind you carry, tucked behind perfect posture, folded into thank you notes, pressed beneath the pages of your primer. At night, you may press your cheek against the cool pillow and wonder what it would feel like to be wild, to run without shoes, to shout, to cry without being corrected. And you don't say these things aloud, because tomorrow there will be tea in the nursery, and everything will be just as it should be. You've walked through many rooms tonight, a freezing attic, a narrow tunnel, a nursery with velvet curtains. You've heard the scrape of coal buckets, the scratch of a name behind a cupboard, the porcelain clink of a doll's tea set. And now all is still. The soot has settled. The corridors are quiet. And whether you drifted off somewhere along the way, or you've been with me through every word, it doesn't matter. Because this story, like so many of the ones we tell, was never meant to shout. It was meant to remember the children whose stories were lost in ledgers, whose names were tucked behind walls, whose lives flickered for only a short while, like a candle in a damp room. But also to remember how childhood, no matter how fragile, leaves a mark, in chalk, in soot, in silk, and in us. So tonight, as you settle into the warmth of your blanket, with no coal to carry, no boots to scrub, no governess at the door, be still. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the faintest sounds from the past, the hush of small footsteps on stone, the whisper of a lullaby, long forgotten, and a single marble rolling gently across a wooden floor.